COVID-19 pandemic and receive an update from Chief Medical Officer Professor Paul Kelly. First Minister's agreed to extend the pandemic leave disaster payment at current rates beyond 30th September. The payment will remain available for as long as mandatory isolation periods are applied by all states and territories. The principle essentially agreed to by all First Ministers is that while the government requires mandated isolation, the government has a responsibility to provide support during that period for the appropriate period which is designated currently, of course, at 5 days, except for people in aged care, disability care, etc., which remains at 7 days. We remain obviously of the view that if people are sick, whether from COVID or from other health issues, they should not be at work, and that is important. National Cabinet agreed the Commonwealth and States and Territories would continue a 50-50 cost-sharing arrangement for the payment. This has currently cost some $2.2 billion in payments have been made during that period. We also will make some changes which are that 3 payments over a period of 6 months would be the maximum, unless there has to be quite extraordinary circumstances of why that's the case. There is some evidence that Services Australia identified that since the 20th of July 2022, 2.6% of all claims received triggered real-time fraud checks in the system, and of those, more than 50% were subsequently rejected, and some 15% were subsequently withdrawn by the claimant. So Services Australia data indicates also that over the 6 months to the 30th of June 2022, 60% of claims were made by individuals who claimed more than once. Of these, about 13% were claimed 4 or more times. That is a claim every 6.5 weeks or more. We also received a report on monkeypox. Internationally, there have been some 57,000 monkeypox cases internationally. There have been some 130 cases in Australia. The numbers are reducing internationally. Numbers reducing from in the UK, for example, they were receiving some 40 cases a day. That is currently down to 5 cases a day. The vaccine that we have made available is rolling out, and there's also been evidence of behaviour change from vulnerable sections of the community. The National Cabinet also considered the national statement that we'll make available to you on the National Day of Mourning that will occur on the 22nd of September, next Thursday. A copy of the statement is available on federation.gov.au. All First Ministers, Premiers and Chief Ministers will travel to Canberra and will be present on that day on next Thursday, which as part of the plans that have been in place for some time is been designated to be the National Day of remembrance for the life and service of Queen Elizabeth II. I'm happy to take questions.
Prime Minister, when would you like to see mandatory isolation rules end?
We'll have a discussion about future arrangements on the 30th of September, when the National Cabinet will meet in person. We'll take advice at that time. Of course, there are different arrangements in place in countries, but what we are seeing is gradually a move towards COVID being treated like other health issues, and clearly we saw with the reduction that we made last time from 7 days to 5, we are making some preparations as well over a potential wave during the northern winter. So those preparations and how we'll respond to them will be a source of further discussion from Chief Health Officers. But there was no discussion about the detail as to changes. We'll take advice on that and we'll make a decision at an appropriate time.
So just for clarity, it wasn't discussed today?
Not in detail. In general, what we're doing is there's a recognition that the idea that you will continue to have the same mandates that you had in place a year ago. The risk factors, of course, are being changed as people go out and get themselves vaccinated. It was, I think, quite a positive statement from the Chief Medical Officer today. He spoke, for example, that the infections in aged care are a quarter of what they were at the end of July, the lowest that they've been all year, and that was part of the evidence which is there. But we need, obviously, to continue to take advice and to make decisions appropriately. And we'll have another discussion in September as to a pathway towards whether a decision is made about further reductions or a time frame for it.
Nick Ryan has called for a national action plan on long COVID. Is that something that you're...
Well, the Chief Health Officers are doing it. With respect to Dr. Ryan, who I certainly respect her views, Chief Health Officers throughout the jurisdictions are working very hard on all of these issues, including examining long COVID, including examining the potential of what will occur in the northern winter and making preparations for it.
Prime Minister, in her maiden speech to Parliament, Sophie Scomp's advocated for making electric vehicles affordable for all Australians. At the time, she had not disclosed the financial interest in Tesla. What's your view on Dr. Scomp's ongoing participation in debate and votes on EV policy?
Well, if all those who drive a petrol car, are they allowed to vote on those issues as well? I think, you know, we need a bit of serious analysis in my view. And if
there is a financial interest.
Well, there's a there's an interest perhaps in people who have a petrol car or what have you. As long as these issues are declared, that's the issue, is transparency. But, you know, it's a matter for Ms Scomps. I mean, she's not a member of my government. She has a responsibility to declare any interest that she has, and people will make their own judgment. But from my perspective, the idea that people only support electric vehicles because of a financial interest is, in my view, a misread of what is actually happening globally.
Questions about transparency. New South Wales ICAC can investigate breaches of ministerial code of conduct. Will Labor's new Integrity Commission choose to investigate recent breaches of the ministerial code of conduct by your ministers over their shareholdings?
There haven't been.
There have been calls for a national regulator for casinos. Do you support this?
I think it's pretty obvious that the state regulators are doing a pretty good job of holding the casino operators to account. That's my observation. I'm not in favour of regulation for the sake of it, and I think it's pretty hard for anyone to argue that either Crown or Star are not being held to account at the moment.
Are those regulators powerful enough in their current form?
These are state-operated regulators, and it's up to the states to respond to that. But quite clearly, what we've seen is regulators taking strong action and foreshadowing further strong action.
Have arrangements for Pacific leaders going over with the Australian plane to London, the Queen's funeral, been finalised, and who has taken up that offer?
We offered passage to senior representatives from all 10 Pacific countries which are Commonwealth members. Final lists are being settled. To date, 4 countries have accepted, and they are the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu and Samoa.
Can I ask you like a $5 vote and what your view is on what should happen to the $5 bill?
My view is that Queen Elizabeth's funeral is next Monday.
So
Queen Elizabeth's funeral is next Monday. My focus isn't on who is on the $5 note.
Prime Minister, August had the highest death rate for COVID-19, so should lifting isolation period even be considered while the death rate is so high?
If you, we didn't consider further restrictions being lifted today. We'll consider in September, and we'll receive advice on that, and then the 8 premiers and chief ministers will have a discussion on the 30th of September.
Can you reveal what those state and territory leaders currently feel about mandatory isolation?
Well, I think I wouldn't be so bold as to pretend that I can speak on behalf of Premier Andrews or Premier Perrottet or Premier Palaszczuk or other premiers or chief ministers. What I can do is indicate to you what we determined today in what was a short meeting today. It lasted less than half an hour, and I've indicated it with full transparency everything that we discussed today and nothing that we didn't.
Prime Minister, it's been announced from Norco that they're going to lay off 170 employees at their Lismore factory. Is this okay given they've been offered millions of taxpayer money?
Well, they have received some in excess of $30 million of taxpayers' money shared between the Commonwealth and the state. And I would hope that Norco look after their employees. I'll continue to work with Premier Perrottet on these issues. I realise that in the Northern Rivers has suffered greatly, including businesses, but we have provided substantial support.
There are reports.
Ministerial.
There and then there.
No,
No,
sorry. There are reports that the Labor government may cut funding for major coalition infrastructure proposals. The Nationals are saying pretty unhappy with that and saying that you're not committed to regional Australia. Are you committed to all of the projects promised by the Morrison government? And if not, how many projects and how much spending will be reprioritised?
That's a bold question. Thank you, Barnaby. Can I say this? That the National Party are committed to pork barrelling. They're not necessarily committed to good infrastructure projects, and where projects are good, we're very positive about them. But the sort of idea that we're bound by what often is projects that benefit private sector interests, which are competitive with other private sector interests, are just extraordinary. The National Party, in terms of the way that they view taxpayer funds as being the same as Liberal and National Party funds, is not the model that the Labor government will follow. We will fund projects, including in regional Australia, that stack up, that represent good investment for taxpayers. The Nats were obsessed with looking after their mates. We're sometimes looking after private interests, and it's not a model for any government to follow.
So are they under review, and at what point?
I just answered the question. I can't be more clear than that.
When will your Federal Integrity Commission be able to investigate potential breaches of the Ministerial Code?
The Ministerial Code has been complied with.
No, just generally.
The Ministerial Code has been
Not
complied
in
with.
reference to this, but
Well, when the legislation is dealt with, it hasn't been introduced yet. I look forward to it being introduced to Parliament in September. People have had access to the debate. The Attorney-General has been very consultative with crossbenchers and also with the opposition, as I have been. And we will introduce the legislation. People will work it through. It will be in accordance with the commitments that we made, which is that it will be strong, and people will have the opportunity to look at the detail when it is introduced and debated in the Parliament.
Is that aspect something you would like to see?
I just answered the question.
Can I ask one more on just foreign affairs?
Sure.
Presidents Putin and Xi Jinping are meeting this week. What do you want to see from that meeting?
Well, what we're seeing, and I'll make this the last question. When it comes to Russia, what I would like to see is that anyone who meets with Vladimir Putin reminds him of the obligation that international leaders have to uphold the international rules of law. And what we've seen with the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a breach of that. It is the invasion of a sovereign state in contravention of international laws and in contravention of something that we had regarded, I think, the idea that there would be a land war in Europe of the type that we are seeing is something that we had hoped we had consigned to the past. It is an opportunity, this question, for me to once again reiterate our support for the sovereign state of Ukraine, to reiterate my praise for President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine in their courageous struggle against Russia and against this brutal invasion. It's coming at a great human cost to the people of Ukraine. They are engaged in an inspirational struggle which is in the interest not only of the people of Ukraine, it is in the interest of all who believe in an orderly global process and the international rule of law. Thanks very much.
I think you should have asked about the coalition.